This is Dear Strategy, episode 120. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Well, welcome back, strategy creators. This is another great episode 120. We're going to bring another strategy question to you. So we have a user-submitted question that we're going to be answering on the show. This one looks like it's going to turn into another one of these listicles. The last listicle I did actually ended up being pretty popular. Even won an award for it. So I'll post what episode that was. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was sometime late last year, and pretty proud of that. So people seem to like these types of things where you could say like, okay, what do I do? And okay, here's what you could do. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, right? So that kind of a thing. And I think we're heading down that road for this question, which I'll get to in just a minute. Before I start, I want to always do a shout out for the company that sponsors this show, the company I work for and founded, Strategy Generation Company. We offer tools and training and all kinds of coaching and consulting all around this area of strategy development. And we really tend to focus on product managers and business leaders, people who really want some hands-on application of how to put a strategy together. Not all the academic stuff, although of course we'll give you some of those tools as well. But really, how do you go ahead and put this stuff into practice in real life? So go check us out at strategygeneration.com. You'll see all the things that we have to offer, and hopefully you'll reach out and take advantage of one or more of those services. So with that said, let's go ahead and get to the question here so we can get you on your way with a great answer. And the question is, Dear Strategy, what are the most important traps and or disruptions to implementing a strategy? So as you can tell, lots and lots and lots of things can get in the way, right? So what I'm going to try and do is categorize my answer into 4 main traps that I normally see companies fall into when they go to implement a strategy. And I'm going to assume here, because the most obvious trap is not having a strategy, but I'm not going to take that cop-out answer, right? Because I'm going to assume that there is a strategy in place. There's some process that you've went through. And now what you're trying to do is get it implemented. And sometimes it doesn't always happen, right? And so what is it that gets in the way? So let's talk about the first one, okay? The first one I'm going to put that gets in the way of implementing a strategy is life. Usually when you go through a strategic process, it's a project, right? And so you gather all your information together, you put together your plan, put together your goals, all those types of things. You put together a presentation, you get buy-in from whoever you need to get buy-in from, whether that's your leadership, your team, your peers, your customers, or all of them. And now you have a plan, right? Well, because that process can be pretty big, right? And sometimes pretty cumbersome for some people in some companies. A lot of times when you're done with it, you kind of breathe a sigh of relief, right? And say, oh, okay, I'm finished. And then you put it away. And now I just get back to normal work and normal life and just get back into my normal routine. And many times you do that without respect for the strategy that you just put together, right? That you spent all that time put it together. And a lot of times this happens when leadership requires you to put together a strategy, requires you to present it to them. Maybe you're not in front of them all the time, so it becomes a big deal, right? They rip you apart sometimes to try and push you towards, a better strategy or a bigger strategy or, bigger goals, whatever it is. And that all of that is a big deal, right? It's a lot of time. It's a lot of energy. And it's like running a marathon. And, you finish running a marathon, you don't want to run another one right away, at least, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm not a marathon runner, but I'm assuming what you want to do is rest, get some water, go rest, go celebrate, whatever else. And that's what you do after one of these big projects as well. Well, again, you do that for too long and the strategy just became an exercise. And now you go back to normal life and you do things the way you always did things, and you don't do it with regard to the strategy. So that's the first thing I would say. And of course, I would say the solution to that is don't make the first part such a big deal. It shouldn't be, right? You should be in a strategic process all the time. And when you're asked to present it to your leadership, you should be presenting an update. So that's kind of solution number one. Solution number two is make sure in a measured way, when you get back to life, you do so with respect to the strategy that you just put together. Okay. So pitfall number two is one that we've talked about a lot on this show. And in fact, we've talked about it a lot here recently. And that has to do with money, right? So when you're putting your strategy together, it's really, really, really important to lay out what investment you need to make your strategy come true. And a lot of times this is missed. So, you'll put together your strategy, put together your plan, put together your initiatives. And then you say, if we do all this stuff, this is the result we're going to get. Yeah. But you know what you forgot is what it is that you're going to need to make that strategy happen. Every single strategy is going to cost some type of money. No strategy is free. Again, we've covered this on recent episodes. I'll put some links in the blog so we can, you can go and learn more about that. But for the most part, you have to make sure that you put your investment together. If you don't, or if you've severely underestimated your strategy or what your strategy is going to cost, then when you go to implement it, you're not going to be able to, right? Because you're going to realize that, oh my God, in order to do this, I needed, 50 more people, or I needed, $1 million or $100,000 or whatever it is. And I didn't account for that. So there's really no way to make your strategy happen. So money is the second big pitfall. And again, the solution to that is make sure you account for it up front in a realistic way. Okay. The third pitfall, this was one that you could do less about, but there is a solution to it. So the third pitfall that I see quite often is changes, right? Just changes, evolution happening in the marketplace. So of course, when you do your strategic process, you're going to do so with respect to customers, competitors, your company, all those different dynamics that you've analyzed. And you're going to take all of those inputs together, and then you're going to put a strategy and a plan together based on what you've learned. But what you've learned is based on some level of what has happened in the past. So that's known and unchanged. But then you're also going to do some analysis based on what you think is going to happen in the future. So you take those inputs and you use them to predict what you think is going to happen in the future. And you're by and large basing your plan around that, what you're anticipating. So all of that part of it is an assumption, right? You really don't know. And I always go back to the origins of strategy. When you think about strategy in a military context, which is kind of where the whole process comes from, you're going to do the best that you can in understanding all of the different environmental factors that you're probably going to face when you bring your troops into battle, let's say, right? So you've analyzed your own strengths, you've analyzed your own weaknesses, you've done the same for your competitors or your enemies in this case. And then you've looked at all the different environmental factors that might affect whatever it is you want to do. And so based on what you think has happened in the past, you use that to make some predictions about what you think is going to happen in the future, and you base your plan on that. But then you step out onto the field and everything changes, right? Everything changes. Well, maybe not everything, but a lot. You can't get everything right. So of course, what you have to do is dynamically respond to that. And if too many of your assumptions are wrong, then your whole strategy becomes null and void, and you're just reacting, and it's probably not a good way to win whatever battle you're trying to win. So again, you could apply this analogy to military, you could apply it to sports, anything, and of course to business as well. You're going to make some predictive assumptions. Those predictive assumptions are not always going to be right. So when those things are not always right, sometimes you just kind of throw the strategy away and then you just start reacting. Well, the solution to this, by the way, is, of course, to have a strategy to begin with, but to try and get as many of the assumptions right as possible. Because if too many of the assumptions are wrong, then again, your whole strategy becomes null and void, and you throw it all away, and then you just start reacting crazily. And again, you're going to be all over the map. So in order to make sure that I'd say the majority of your assumptions are correct, you have to spend time analyzing. Remember that the assumptions are all going to be based on what's happened in the past. You're not just making stuff up, right? It's just like in sports. What are you doing? You're watching film, right? You're watching film of the other team to see what they've done in the past, and you use that information to come up with what you think they're going to do when they step on the field against your team. And that's exactly what you have to do in real life as well. The more time you spend analyzing the past, the more correct your assumptions about the future are likely to be. And so one of the biggest problems that I see is that companies skip that part. They don't spend enough time on it. Just a quick, story on this. When I go and I deliver strategy classes, strategy workshops, which I do all the time, I do it for a living. I'll spend a full day out of 2 days, maybe 2.5, but a full day just on the analysis part, right? And people get bored, quite honestly. I shouldn't say bored. Our classes are incredibly exciting, but they get almost turned off because they think they're going to come into the class and right away start talking about the future. And they're a bit surprised when I say, no, you have to spend a lot of time on the past so that you could properly predict the future. And a lot of people don't want to do that, right? It's very analytical. It's data intensive. It's not something that they came in expecting to do, but it is one of the most important parts of a strategy process. So all of that to say, with this pitfall number 3, which is changes happening in the environment, the way that you combat that is try and predict as many of them as possible. And the way that you combat that or do that properly is by making sure you analyze the past as thoroughly as you possibly can. Okay, the last pitfall that I'm going to talk about is what I'll call formality, right? So why do strategies not get implemented as effectively as they could? Well, formality is definitely one of them. And what I'll say about that is a lot of people have trouble dealing in a very formal kind of structured process, right? So strategy, especially in large corporations, can definitely fall into that category where you really have to do your analysis. You have to put all of it together. You put it into a presentation, all of that stuff is something that generally should happen so that you can communicate it to others and everything else. And a lot of that turns people off. So, those people that just want to kind of get right to it, they'll skip all of that, right? They'll skip all the formality of strategy and they'll just do strategy intuitively off the top of their heads. By the way, that's okay by and large if you're the only person that's going to be implementing the strategy. So if you're a solopreneur, for example, and your whole strategy is in your head and you feel good managing that way, I have nothing against that. I don't personally work very well that way. I need to write things down and make sure that I have it so I could refer back to it. So I definitely recommend that, but it's not the only way to work. I mean, there are many, many great intuitive strategic leaders who just had it all in their head. Here's the problem though, is that if you're that type of a leader and you have it all in your head and you need other people to help you implement your strategy, then it's going to fall apart very quickly. So even if you hate the formality of it, right, you need to have it because you need some tool to be able to communicate to others what it is you're intending to do and what you need them to do. And all of that has to come together around some formal plan. And again, this is something that you really do need to do, even though in companies that, really want to move fast, whatever else, they say, oh, who needs a plan? That's not necessary. That's not required. It almost becomes like a bad thing, right? A bad mark on a leader if they have to write things down and have to have a plan. But I would tell you, most companies that kind of run by the seat of their pants or run completely intuitively, unless they're running all by themselves, I've seen more of those types of approaches fail than when people actually write things down, get everyone involved, and communicate effectively. Now, that's not to say that you should overburden yourself with process, right? You can go too much in the other direction as well. And I've seen that also. I won't put that as a pitfall because I don't think that, quite honestly, is as common as not having a plan, right? But you definitely can go that way and overanalyze and make it over formal, and then it turns people off from the process. So I guess, you can go that way too. So maybe I'll just modify this on the fly here and say formality. It has to be right at the right level. It has to be right in the sweet spot, right? Not so informal that nobody knows what they're doing, and not so formal that the whole thing becomes just process and you never get to executing. So we'll kind of put it there. Okay. So there you go. Those are the biggest traps or disruptions or pitfalls that I personally see when I see companies trying to implement a strategy, maybe having some trouble with that. Again, just to reiterate, the first is life gets in the way. The second is money gets in the way. The third is changes in the environment sometimes, become a real problem for people. And the fourth one is the level of formality, either being not formal enough, which I think is more common, or too formal, where it becomes just an overburden to do anything strategically. So There you go. So hopefully that helped you. Hopefully that answer is something that you could do something with. And again, if you have a question that you want to be featured on the show, please don't be shy. Go visit us at dearstrategy.net. And you will be able to go and click on the contact us link that's up in the upper right-hand corner. That'll take you to a form where you can ask a question for the show or give us feedback or interact and whatever you'd like to do. We also, of course, do a blog post for every single one of these episodes. So go and interact there as well. Tell us what you think. Offer your opinions. We love to have group discussions that come from some of these things that we're talking about. While you're doing all that, please don't forget to make time for the plan, and we will see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.